Dear listeners, a huge shout out to all of our listeners. We have received a ton of comments and suggestions. We are still going through and checking what all can be implemented. Please suggest if you have not done it so far, and don't forget to drop a hi in the comments section. That hi means a lot to us. Now let's start with the story. My name is Frank James. I was told I was named after my mother's late father, not the outlaw despite relentless teasing and more than a few fist fights in my school years. I didn't always win those fights, but I never ran from one. I'm originally from Missouri, the birthplace and burial place of the outlaw Jesse James. I guess that's why every a-hole there wanted to fight me. Things changed when I moved to Philadelphia and I could stop fighting and live in peace. My wife Jessie and I met in a college organic chemistry class on the first day of our freshman year. When the professor read the roll, he commented that if Jesse Ivins, whose name came right before mine, married me, we would be Frank and Jesse James. We all laughed. Jesse and I had lunch together that day, and every other day for the next 4 years. 2 months after we met, we were intimate for the first time during a weekend at the Tropicana Hotel in the Chelsea neighborhood of Atlantic City. The song Chelsea Morning by Joni Mitchell was always our song after that weekend. Among the first questions that Jesse ever asked me was my opinion of men who beat their wives. I thought that was weird and explained that I would never dream of hitting my wife or any other woman. Then Jessie explained that her father frequently beat her mother, and that's why they divorced. I hugged and kissed Jessie and swore I would never hit her. I'd been in more than a few fights in Missouri because, as a child, I had a hard time learning to keep my temper. I knew I had a violent side and fought hard to control it. It became easier as I became older. We married a month after we graduated. We didn't have a lot of money, so we had our honeymoon back at the Tropicana Hotel in the Chelsea section of Atlantic City, the site of our first intimacy. I had been working since high school in the warehouse and trucking department of a local pharmaceutical company. Even though I now had a college degree, I didn't leave because I was making more money than the average college graduate and was fast-tracked to eventually run the whole department when the present manager retired in 2 years. With my help, Jessie was also hired by the company. It's a great company that treats its employees like partners, not slaves. And that philosophy flows down from the very top. Toxic managers don't last long before they're counseled, and if that doesn't change their attitude, they're fired. Anthony Capri has been the president since forever. He spends an hour each day visiting a different department and getting to know each of his employees. He can tell you how many children each of us have, though he doesn't remember all the names. Most of his employees would walk through fire for him. My wife, Jessie, has always been a flirt. During our 20-year marriage, we've had many arguments over her flirtatious behavior. Sometimes I think she does it just to get a rise out of me. Yet despite this character flaw, I believe that Jessie has always been faithful and never cheated on me and our children. I believe that someone who cheats on their spouse is also cheating on their children. Of course, over 20 years I've been tempted to cheat, but I never did. I must, however, admit that more than once, after seeing a Jennifer Connelly movie, I imagined that I was making love to her and while being intimate with my wife. I don't think that's cheating, but I can't be sure. I do know that if given a choice between one night with Jennifer Connelly or my wife, though I might be tempted, I would undoubtedly choose to be with my wife. I still love her that much. My father, who is a zoologist, calls me a swan. He says that because, like swans, I'm mated for life. He knows me very well. Until the past year or so, men were always coming on to her. Now, she's a few pounds heavier, has some gray in her hair, lines on her face. Now show that she's given birth to 3 children. Men rarely flirt back with her. Once my wife hit 40, her flirting intensified as fewer men flirted back. I think she wants desperately to prove that she's still desirable. One night at a block party, all the men were ignoring my wife and paying attention to the new 25-year-old woman who moved onto our street with her husband. My wife hated that woman on sight. In the past, my wife had always had the eye of all the men. Now, she wasn't even in the running, and it was killing her. I made a big fuss over how pretty her dress was and how beautiful she was, but it had no effect on her. She said I had to tell her those things because I was her husband. I said that I told her that because it was the truth. Jessie is a pharmaceutical representative for the same drug company where I work. She travels to doctors' offices and explains the latest drugs that our company has developed. Half of her job is to flirt with the doctors, so she loves her job. I now manage 50 employees at the trucking, shipping, and warehouse department for the same company, but in a different building a few miles away from my wife's office. Sometimes I take off my tie and jacket to help load trucks if someone is out sick, so I'm in pretty good shape. I don't have to do that, but it gains me respect from my employees, and that makes my job easier. Twice a year, our company paid a consultant a fortune to conduct team-building exercises, which I found to be a total waste of time and money. Once a month, I take everyone out for beer. I persuaded the company to pay for these outings as a team-building experience. The company president Anthony Capri liked and approved my idea, and now every department does it. It's cheaper and much more effective. Occasionally, Mr. Capri joins us. Once over a beer session with the warehouse crew, he said there was more innate intelligence in our trucking department than all of the Harvard Business School. He's gone through 4 different Harvard MBAs as vice presidents in the last 10 years, as he tried unsuccessfully to groom each one to take over from him. We're a close-knit company. Mr. Capri has known me for over 20 years and trusts my judgment. When there was a problem in the accounting department, he asked me to take several of the employees one-on-one out to lunch over beer to identify the problem. Their new manager was a shit who timed how long people were in the bathroom and berated them in front of everyone if in his opinion they took too long. Mr. Capri counseled the manager on his behavior, but it didn't change and Mr. Capri fired him. Then things returned to normal in that department. Mr. Capri wanted me to take college courses on human resources for a promotion to that department, but I respectfully declined, which disappointed Mr. Capri. I like my present job, I told him. 4 times a year my wife must travel to a different city for a week of training on new drugs. Even after 20 years I still miss her, and I'm miserable when she leaves on those trips. Lately my wife wasn't interested in being romantic with me. She either had a headache or was too tired. For me, sex wasn't just about physical love, it was mostly about intimacy. It was how we showed what we meant to one another, and now I realized I no longer meant that much to my wife, the love of my life. She was drifting away from me, and I didn't know why despite repeatedly asking her. At her department's Christmas party I met Nick, the newest and youngest pharmaceutical rep in her department. My wife had been bending my ear about Nick for the past few weeks. Now I understood what was wrong in my marriage. My wife was glowing as she introduced me to Nick. Nick told me that I was with the most beautiful woman at the party. Jesse blushed. I instantly knew what his plans were with my wife. He wasn't subtle, but was silently thinking that he would take my wife from me, at least for a few hours. He was handsome, athletic, and unlike me had a full head of hair. I'm more than a little sensitive about becoming bald. Nick's handshake was so strong and painful that I wondered why he was trying so hard to assert some kind of dominance over me as he smirked at my wife. At that point my spidey senses were on high alert. I squeezed back until he grimaced in pain. Loading trucks made my hands very strong. Sometimes during a break, the guys and I will arm wrestle. Though I'm no longer the strongest in the crew, I can hold my own. I enjoyed making him feel pain. I didn't like the way my wife looked at him like he was a prize she wanted to win, which was the exact same way he was looking at her. I'm not much of a dancer, but I try. Jessie danced with Nick as much as she danced with me, and I was angry and let her know. She dismissed my concerns without a second thought, as though my feelings no longer were important to her. Mr. Capri, the president of the company, asked for everyone's attention. He said that this company was one kind of team, and that many members of this team were on another team with their partners and families. The company often asked people to work late or travel, which kept them away from their families. I believe that it's important for our company to support the home life of our employees. In his way of thinking, the importance of the families supporting his employees was crucial to the success of the company. He asked all the spouses to stand up. He began clapping and everyone joined him. Then he walked around and handed each spouse or partner a check for $500 to show that his appreciation was more than lip service. A few weeks after New Year's, my wife had to attend an out-of-town training session, along with all the other reps in her office, including Nick. In preparation, my wife bought some new clothes and some new lingerie at Victoria's Secret, which she didn't announce, but neither did she keep it a secret. For me, the final straw was her trip to the hairdresser the week before she left to have her hair dyed to remove the gray. I voiced my fear to her, but she dismissed me as being overly jealous, but she couldn't look me in the eye. I put my hands on her shoulders. If I even suspect you've been unfaithful to me, I'll divorce you immediately and never look back. I've never slept with Nick, my wife responded. She was now in damage control mode. Have you had lunch with him? I asked and she nodded yes. Have you gone out for drinks with him after work? I also asked and she also nodded yes. Have you discussed our marriage with him? Again, her fateful nod yes. I was afraid to ask her if she had kissed him. I was sure she had. Then in my mind, you already have at least an emotional affair with him, and it must stop right now. Jessie straightened her back. Don't give me orders. You're my husband, not my slave owner. I didn't need to be hit over the head with a baseball bat to figure out what she was planning on doing with Nick when they went away together for the company seminar. Maybe Nick was the one who needed to be hit over the head with a baseball bat, and I was just the guy to make it happen. I had a childhood friend, Dennis, who went to prison for beating up his wife's boyfriend. When he was released, he couldn't get a job except for washing cars, even though he was a college graduate. I convinced my company to hire him. I fought for him all the way up to the company president, Mr. Capri, who agreed. Nick posed no threat to anyone else. The president, at my urging, started a program to hire ex-cons for the loading dock and other positions. 48 of the 50 ex-cons we hired never gave us a moment's trouble. I don't want to talk about the other two. I try to reason with people, but those two guys brought out my violent side, and when they learned I wasn't a pushover, they quit a little worse for wear. There was a story about how successful the program was in the local newspaper, which was picked up by a local TV station, and then it was shown on the TV network all over the nation about how responsible companies like ours helped former prisoners integrate back into society. It secured a lot of good press for the company and our president. Mr. Capri was presented with an award by our state's governor, which was also reported nationally on TV. In turn, he invited me and Jesse to dinner to thank me for coming up with the program and allowing him to take the credit on TV for what was really my program. I was flattered and amazed that he took the time for us. My wife worked in his building, and they already knew each other. He was in his early 80s and treated us both like his grandchildren. He said that the company spent millions on public relations, but that I produced more positive news for the company than the entire PR department had in the past 5 years. He was grateful, and if I ever needed a favor, to just call him. He handed me a card with his personal cell phone number. I was on cloud 9.5. Even my wife, who had occasionally looked down on my decidedly blue-collar job, was now proud of me. My happiness was short-lived. I couldn't sleep one night as I worried about my wife going on this upcoming business trip with Nick. I wanted to threaten him, but I didn't want to lose my job, or worse, go to prison. I learned from my ex-con workers enough about prison, so I didn't want to even visit one. I spoke with my friend Dennis, who went to prison for beating his wife's lover. I told him about Nick and asked for advice. He said that for $5,000 untraceable dollars, his former cell mate would take care of the problem for me. I rejected that advice. If anyone was going to beat the crap out of Nick, it would be me. Maybe I wouldn't have to beat him. Maybe I could scare him away from my wife. I know that the government has mandated that every computer printer or copy machine must print a small microcode on each page that identifies what printer the page came from. I knew not to use my home printer or the one in my office for my plan. I learned Nick's email from a company directory. I went to a Best Buy store and quickly and surreptitiously sent Nick an email from a demonstration computer with a fictitious email account, warning him that men who cheat with married women are sinful and can face severe and painful consequences for their immoral behavior, up to and including being hit by lightning or maybe brass knuckles. Of course, I wore a floppy hat, sunglasses, and a face mask, and Best Buy Sonos security footage could be used to identify me. Much to my shock and surprise, Nick responded to me directly by email, bragging that he wasn't scared of me and would sleep with whomever he wanted. That if my wife no longer found me desirable, it was my problem and not his. I didn't back down. I suggested that we meet at the boxing ring at a local gym and settle this like men. Though he was younger, I believed I was stronger and certainly more motivated. The next morning, I was summoned to the office of the president again. This time I believed I was in trouble, though I wondered why the president was involved and not my direct manager or HR. I walked into the plush office only to see Nick seated on a couch next to Mr. Capri and my wife seated in a chair opposite Nick. I thought I was about to be fired and maybe even divorced. I had trouble breathing. The president said, "Nick, I want you to empty your pockets onto this coffee table." Nick took out an iPhone. Mr. Capri took it and stopped it from recording our conversation. He looked at Frank and me with a stern, unforgiving gaze. "Frank thinks that you're trying to seduce his wife, and Nick thinks you've threatened him with violence. When you challenged him to a boxing match, he went to HR. HR took his complaint seriously and kicked it upstairs to me." I was about to speak when the president lit a cigar and told me to remain silent. He turned to Nick. "Nick, let me be blunt. Years ago, my wife left me for some slick talking shit. She broke my heart and took half for my money. Karma caught up with him 2 years later in a hit-and-run car accident with a car that looked suspiciously like mine. Apparently, he was injured so badly that he could no longer be intimate with my wife, and she unsuccessfully begged me to take her back. I abhor cheating, seducing ladies' men. Further, since I know that you and Frank's wife will both be at the training sessions, I want you to know that I've instructed our head of security to keep a close watch on you too. If I even suspect that you so much as hold the hand of Jesse, or any married woman who works for me, you'll be out on your butt before closing time for violating our company's moral clause in your contract, and then I would advise you to carefully look both ways before you cross a street for the rest of your life. I want the spouses of my employees to know that extramarital affairs are not tolerated here, and that their marriages are safe from predation at work. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Nick turned white as he nodded yes. "Nick, you're very good at your job, but you're no longer a teenager and must stop acting like one. You can have a great career in this company if and only if you grow up and conduct yourself in a moral way. Since we sell ethical drugs, we must all behave ethically not just in our professional lives but our personal lives. We have a reputation for being responsible. Never lose sight of that. I was amazed as the president continued. Frank works with a group of ex-cons, some of whom have violent pasts. He's given them a chance to turn their lives around when no one else would. These men would go to hell and back for him if he just snapped his fingers. Nick, I've probably saved you from having your teeth bashed in and your legs broken in a back alley by a masked man, and I don't mean the Lone Ranger. Unless of course Frank did it himself, which he's quite capable of doing. That's just a word to the wise. Nick was in shock and excused himself to go to the bathroom, though it may have been too late judging by how he ran. The president turned to my wife. Jesse, if your loving, loyal husband can't trust you, why should I? If you'll cheat and lie to him, why would you be honest with your employer? You have a wonderful, compassionate, caring husband. Don't ruin your marriage for some cheap piece of shit like Nick. My wife began crying. I put my arms around her as she kept saying she was ashamed of herself. She thanked me and the president for stopping a train wreck just a few days before it would certainly have happened. Then he turned to me. I don't want you to acknowledge whether you sent that threatening email to Nick. I believe you did, and I'm very impressed that you did. I was really overjoyed by your boxing challenge. Running this company requires a just and compassionate hand most of the time. Sometimes, however, you must be a mean, semi-violent son of a gun. I can be both, and now I know that you can be both. I also know that you're a natural leader, and a company like ours doesn't need a manager. It requires a leader. In a year, I'm retiring. I don't want you wasted in the warehouse any longer. I want you to spend a month in each of our main departments so that a year from now, you can take over the reins from me. You have a degree in organic chemistry. You'll be spending 1 day a week with our researchers, so you'll soon be up to speed on advances in pharmaceuticals. This company has been my baby for over 50 years, and I'll be damned if I'll let some a-hole MBA run it into the ground when I'm no longer here to protect it. Trust your department heads. They won't steer you wrong. But when they disagree, you'll have to mediate and make the final decision. I want you and Jesse to take a week off and travel to any place on earth you want on the company's dime, and then come back rested and ready to hit the ground running. I looked at Jessie and hummed the tune from Chelsea Morning. She nodded her head in agreement. We both knew where we needed to go to reconnect. After we left Mr. Capri's office, my wife congratulated me on my incredible promotion with a passionate kiss. She whispered in my ear, "Would you have really beaten Nick up?" I nodded yes. I would beat the crap out of anyone who messes with our marriage. I have a violent streak that I've always tried to control. I guess it's genetic. I've kept a secret from you and everyone else in my life. I really am the great-great-great-grandson of the outlaw Jesse James. My wife Jessie nearly squeezed the life out of me. We went back to Atlantic City for a lust and love-filled weekend. We had a Chelsea afternoon and evening. We never got out of bed except to go to the bathroom. Coming out of the bathroom, my wife stood naked in front of a full-length mirror. I'm having a difficult time accepting that I'm no longer young and pretty. She turned to me. How can you still want to make love to an aging, sagging, graying woman like me? I got up and held her in my arms. Because I still see the beautiful young girl I fell in love with so many years ago. Can that be enough for you? Jessie knocked me down onto the bed and ravaged me all night until a Chelsea morning. Now for the second story. I was madly in love with my wife Judy for 20 years, ever since the night I met her at a college graduation party. We had never met before that day, even though we attended the same college for 4 years. What most impressed me that day was my wife's knowledge of the expensive scotch she brought to the party, which we all enjoyed as we sang along to various Beatles songs, especially When I'm 64, in a semi-drunken stupor. Her father owned, and she worked at his high-end liquor store. We spent the next hour talking about whiskey and bourbon. She invited me to a whiskey tasting that weekend at the store. We've been together ever since. She still works there as the office manager. I sell carpeting. It's not a very exciting job, but with the addition of my wife's paycheck, it pays the bills. My wife and I love the Beatles song. When I'm 64, the DJ played at our wedding for our first dance. We have 3 children, Vera, Chuck, and Dave, in honor of our favorite song. When my wife was pregnant again with a girl, we couldn't decide whether to name her Lucy or Rita, also from Beatles songs. Unfortunately, my wife suffered a miscarriage, and frankly, she never recovered from the loss. Nothing I said or did to comfort her worked. She blamed me for the loss because I had been so insistent that we have a 4th child. Looking back, I think that was the beginning of the end to our marriage. She no longer wanted intimacy with me or even to hug me. I hoped that she just needed a few months to recover from the miscarriage and that I had to be patient with her. For my 40th birthday last year, my father-in-law gave me a $600 25-year-old bottle of Glenlivet Scotch. I hadn't yet opened it. I was saving it for a special occasion. My wife gave me a gym membership as she told me to lose the beer belly and take better care of myself. She also suggested that I get hair plugs to fix my receding hairline. She isn't subtle. She works out at gym twice a week and weighs the same as she did the day I met her. I admit that I've let myself go a bit. I can find the time to work out or earn a living, but I don't have the energy for both. A month later, I had a hard day at work when I was undercut on price and lost a large commercial sale I had spent the past 2 weeks working on. I came home looking forward to sampling that scotch in consolation. I opened the liquor cabinet and found that the bottle had been opened and about 4 shots of scotch were gone. I was furious. I had 3 teenage children and I wanted to know which one broke the rules to drink alcohol, and not just any alcohol, but from this exorbitantly expensive bottle. I instantly knew that each of my kids would point to the others and I'd never get at the truth. I bought and installed a motion sensor camera in the bookshelf opposite the liquor cabinet. When I learned which of my kids drank the scotch, there would be hell to pay. Loss of car privileges for at least a month would just be the starting point. I'm not a strict disciplinarian, but I do set strict limits on important issues like underage drinking or drug use. Frankly, I was surprised that one of my kids would test me like this. It was uncharacteristic, because they were good kids, but I guess teenagers need to rebel sometimes and see if they can stretch the boundaries of what their parents will tolerate. 3 days later, I saw that even more scotch was missing. I removed the memory card from the hidden camera and placed it in my computer. I was shocked, astounded, and furious to discover video of my half-naked wife with a completely naked man as he poured himself and my wife some of my scotch. He wasn't younger than I was, he wasn't in better shape, so I didn't understand why she was intimate with him. However, one look at his Johnson, as she licked scotch off it, and I suddenly understood what she saw in him. I have never cheated on my wife, and I would never have believed that my wife of 20 years would ever cheat on me if I hadn't seen the irrefutable evidence. I realized that if I didn't immediately leave the home to cool off, I would do something that would put my wife in a hospital and me in jail when she returned home. I got onto my bicycle and pedaled away for a few hours and 20 miles until I calmed down. For me, 2 hours of bike riding does more to reduce stress than 2 hours of drinking. As an added benefit, I don't wake up with a hangover. The irony of this is that because my wife works at a liquor store, I could buy all the booze I wanted at an enormous discount. I wish she worked at a bicycle store. I knew I would divorce my wife, but I needed revenge on this marriage breaking a hole who thought he could take my wife and my booze. He had destroyed my life, and I would make sure he paid for it. If you called me a vindictive SOB, you'd be right. My wife was safe because she was the mother of my children, and I could never bring myself to harm her. I came up with a plan. It was more of an inspiration. I bought another motion sensor camera, but this one was Wi-Fi enabled. When triggered, it would send me a live video on my iPhone. There are a couple of semi-shady ex-cons who work on the loading dock of my company. I bought $200 of the date narco, Rohypnol, from one of them, and then gave him another $200 to forget it ever happened. I returned home that night to discover more of my booze gone. This wasn't a one-time betrayal. This was a longer-term affair in my mind. I warmed up a tumbler of scotch so the drug would dissolve completely and placed more than a few Rohypnol tablets in it, then poured it all back into the scotch bottle. I believed that this shit came to my house 3 times a week at about noon. I would be ready for him. I bought an identical bottle of the scotch and emptied a little bit of it. I hid the pristine bottle in a cabinet near to the liquor cabinet. 2 days later, I was at work when my iPhone told me that it was scotch party time once again. I was disgusted to see him licking the scotch off her body. Rohypnol needs about 30 minutes to take effect. That was also the amount of time I needed to drive home from work. I told my boss that I felt sick and drove home. This excuse for going home to satisfy the police was also part of my plan. I parked in my driveway and silently entered the back door. I found my wife and her lover sound asleep on the living room floor. His clothes were strewn about. I placed some Rohypnol pills in his pants pocket, and I replaced the drugged scotch bottle with the pristine one. I removed the hidden cameras and placed them in my car. Then I went upstairs, changed all the sheets on our bed, and brought down some clothing for my naked wife. After I dressed her, I carried her, the hidden cameras, dirty sheets, and tampered scotch bottle, and the glasses they had used into my car, and drove 5 minutes away to the house of my waiting sister. My sister and I exchanged cars. My sister, an unconscious wife, then drove to our beach house in Mexico 2 hours away, and I returned home where I broke a small window pane which would make it appear that someone broke it to unlock and open my front door. My wife's naked lover was still sprawled out on the floor. I phoned 911 to report that a crazy naked man broke into my house and attacked me. Then I punched the unconscious scumsucker hard in his nose and kicked him twice as hard between his legs. For good measure, I crushed the fingers on his right hand with my foot. A few minutes later, the police arrived and I went outside to meet them. I explained that I found a naked man in my house and he attacked me, so I fought back. I showed them my ID to prove that I lived here. I told the police that I'd never seen this man before and I was in fear for my life. I asked them to check the rest of the house to determine if there were any more people hidden there. I also explained that my wife was visiting with my sister 100 miles away in Mexico. The unconscious man was handcuffed, arrested, and transported to a hospital jail ward. I followed the police to the station to make out a report. I was later told that when he regained consciousness, he was handcuffed to the hospital bed. He was disoriented and didn't understand what was happening at first. Then he claimed that he had been invited into my house by my wife and for some reason lost consciousness. The police had searched the house and knew that my wife wasn't there. He claimed that he had been intimate with my wife for months. They had been so discreet, however, that no one knew about them and no one could corroborate his story. He claimed that somehow I must have drugged him. He explained that he drank some of my scotch. The police returned to my house, examined the clean bed sheets, and took away the unadulterated bottle of scotch for lab analysis. My sister knew everything that had happened and threatened my wife with exposure of her affair to the world if she alibied her lover. I demanded that my wife remain in Mexico, away from any subpoena forcing her to testify for her lover until after his trial. I wanted that scumsucker in jail, and I promised her a better divorce settlement if she complied. The perp phoned his wife and begged her to bail him out of jail, but as she learned why he was in jail, she refused. A few days later, the lab report that he did have the date narco in his system, but none was found in the bottle of scotch. They believed that he intentionally took the narco, some of which was found in his pants pocket on the living room floor. Some people use it intentionally for the high it could produce. He was sentenced to 90 days in jail. He was my wife's dentist and lost his license because of the drugs found on him. Of course, with the fingers on his right hand broken, he wouldn't have been able to practice dentistry anyway. I waited 3 months to divorce my wife. We rented our house, so that wasn't an issue. I gave her a 60-40 split of all our assets as I had promised if she wouldn't testify in her boyfriend's defense. Trying to keep more would have cost me more in legal bills than I would have saved. She knew better than to fight it. I never told my children or anyone else the truth. As far as everyone knew, my wife had been faithful, but we had grown tired of each other. That was 25 years ago. I haven't yet met a beautiful woman 10 years younger who has fallen insanely in love with me, though I did join a gym to try and tone up my body, but I'm afraid it didn't work, or at least not in the 3 months I tried it. Of course I miss my wife, but I could never reconcile with her because I could never again trust her. When her dentist or lover got out of jail, they reconnected, and after both of their divorces, they married each other. Her new husband works at his father-in-law's liquor store. It's a far cry from being a rich dentist. At the first birthday party for my oldest grandson, my ex-wife's new husband had a few drinks and yelled at me for drugging him and ruining his life. "You're just saying that to make me feel good," I taunted as I laughed in his face. After their mother's 20th wedding anniversary to her second husband, our children informed me that she was happy. Even though I've been alone all these years, I don't regret divorcing her. I couldn't live with a cheater. If I can't trust a woman, I can't love her. A few times a year I travel to Nevada where adult entertainment is legal to spend time with an escort named Cindy. Sometimes we aren't even intimate, and I just take her out for dinner because I miss female companionship. Cindy knows my life story, and she came up with an idea that I loved. What keeps me sane is that my 3 children live just a few minutes away. I babysit for my grandchildren a few days a week, and that fills me with more joy than I can explain. The scientists who claim that there is no such thing as a perpetual motion machine have never met my 2-year-old grandson John or his 3-year-old cousin Lucy. After my grandkids run me ragged for a few hours, their parents take them home, and I usually fall asleep on my couch because I'm too tired to walk upstairs to my bedroom. It's the best kind of tired. My wife's cheating denied me the life I dreamt of, but my grandchildren are a more than adequate compensation. I guess that once a cheater, always a cheater is a truism. When her new husband turned 63, my ex-wife caught him cheating with a 30-year-old woman on his birthday. He met my special friend Cindy when she came into the liquor store, and Cindy seduced him as a favor to me. My ex received a text telling her to go to a motel room to see her husband with another woman. It cost me more than a couple of dollars, but I loved the revenge. Our divorce was so far in the past that no one thought I had anything to do with it. As they say, revenge is a dish best served cold. The next week, my ex and I were both at our daughter's house when my crying ex-wife criticized me for not being empathic to her pain. She said I couldn't understand how much it hurt to have someone I loved betray me. That was when I realized how stupid she was. Judy decided she didn't need her new husband, and would no longer feed him. She divorced him now that he was 64. Dear listeners, sending loads of love to Ronald Burns for his contribution, and to all our listeners, thank you for being part of this literary journey with us. You can check out Ron's work at Amazon, and we have shared the links in the description box below. And if you want to share your work with us, please send your work at the email mentioned in the description box, and we will publish it for our listeners at Lost Love Chronicles. Please share your thoughts in the comments section, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.